Chapter 1. Death in Betrayal. Looking back, I can hardly believe I was so easily deceived. Jonathan Hale had walked into my life with charm and grace, a gentleman with polished words and perfect timing. As the only heiress of the White family, I'd always known people wanted my wealth. But Jonathan, I'd thought he was different. "Elena," he'd said one evening, his voice soft as silk, "I'd give my life to make you happy." And I believed him, every word. Within months, I accepted his proposal, dreaming of love and happiness. But those dreams shattered on our wedding night. The warm, loving man I'd adored vanished, replaced by someone cold and calculating. Affection was replaced by distance, sweet words by icy commands. One night, I couldn't stand the silence any longer. Finding him in the study, I confronted him. "Jonathan, why have you changed?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. He looked up, his expression smug, as if he'd been waiting for this. "Changed?" he mocked, his tone dripping with contempt. "You really thought I married you for love?" The words hit like a blow. "But the way you looked at me? The promises?" "Promises?" He laughed, cold and sharp. "Words are merely tools, Elena. I used them to get what I wanted. Now, everything you own is mine." From that moment, my life became a prison. Jonathan isolated me, seized control of my family's estate, and took pleasure in watching me wither. Day by day, I grew weaker, confined to the manor, and cut off from everyone I loved. In my final hours, weak and feverish, I lay in bed, barely clinging to life. As I drifted in and out, I heard footsteps. Jonathan stood in the doorway, smirking as he looked down at me. "Rest well, my dear," he murmured, his voice chillingly soft. "Your suffering is almost over." And with those words, darkness claimed me. Or so I thought. Chapter 2. Rebirth and Resolve. Darkness. For what felt like an eternity, there was only that cold, endless void. And then, suddenly, light. I gasped, the air rushing into my lungs, my heart pounding wildly. I opened my eyes, expecting to see that dim, cold room where I had taken my last breath. But I wasn't in that room. Instead, I lay in my own bed, the familiar four-poster draped with fine silks. Morning light spilled through the windows. My fingers brushed the embroidered sheets, and I sat up in shock, my heart racing. Had it all been a dream? Or something else? I turned, and there, on my nightstand, sat the ivory wedding invitation I remembered from so long ago. "You are cordially invited to the wedding of Elena White and Jonathan Hale." My wedding had not happened yet. The nightmare that had been my life with Jonathan, none of it had happened yet. It struck me then, a second chance. I rose, heart pounding as memories surged. I remembered his cruelty, his lies, the mocking laughter in his eyes as he watched me waste away. I would not let him do it again. Jonathan Hale may have stolen my life once, but this time, I would be prepared. Later that day, as I walked down the corridors of my family's home, I caught sight of him, the man who had betrayed me, waiting for me with that charming smile I once adored. But now I saw through it, and I had to suppress the disgust that churned within me. "Elena," he greeted me smoothly, stepping forward as if he owned me. "I was hoping we could talk about our plans for the wedding." I looked him straight in the eyes, forcing my voice to remain calm. "Actually, Jonathan, I've been thinking. I'm not sure the marriage is right for me." His smile flickered, replaced by a look of shock he quickly tried to hide. "Not right for you?" he echoed, voice tight. "Elena, don't be absurd." "It's not absurd," I replied, steel creeping into my voice. "Perhaps we rushed things. I need time to reconsider." Jonathan's eyes darkened, his pleasant mask slipping just slightly. But I held his gaze firmly, no longer the naive girl who had once fallen for him. This time, I was ready to fight. And as he struggled to regain his composure, I felt a surge of satisfaction. I was no longer his to control. Chapter 3. Breaking the Engagement. The morning sunlight filtered into the parlor as I sat waiting, my hands folded in my lap. I knew Jonathan would arrive soon, and I knew exactly what I had to do. The man who once held my heart, the man I'd foolishly trusted with my future, would no longer be part of my life. This time, I would end things before he had the chance to poison my world. The door creaked open, and Jonathan entered, his confident stride faltering slightly as he noticed my serious expression. "Elena," he greeted me, the familiar mask of charm settling over his face. "You look lovely as always." He crossed the room, attempting to take my hand, but I pulled it back before he could touch me. "Jonathan," I began, keeping my voice steady, "I've made a decision. I want to end our engagement." For a moment, his face froze, as if he hadn't heard me properly. Then, slowly, he forced a smile, though his eyes held a glint of anger. "Elena, darling, let's not be hasty. You must be under some stress. Weddings do that to brides, you know." "No, Jonathan," I replied, my tone firm. "This isn't stress or doubt. I've thought about it carefully, and I know this marriage isn't right for me." His hand clenched, his knuckles white. "You don't mean that," he said, his voice low. "After all we've planned, the arrangements are nearly complete. This wedding is happening, Elena." I straightened, drawing strength from the memories of the suffering he'd caused me in my past life. "It's not happening, Jonathan. I won't marry someone who only sees me as a tool for power and wealth." His charming facade cracked, replaced by a look of barely concealed rage. "You have no idea what you're giving up," he spat. "You think you can just cast me aside?" "Yes," I said simply. "I can." Jonathan stared at me, fury flashing in his eyes, but I didn't look away. This time, I wasn't the weak, trusting girl he'd once controlled. I was ready to end things on my terms, to claim my life back. Finally, he turned, his mouth set in a hard line. "You'll regret this, Elena," he muttered, his voice thick with venom. "No one turns their back on me without consequences." He stormed out, leaving a dark promise hanging in the air. But I felt no fear. For the first time, I was free from his grip, and nothing, not his threats or his anger, could take that freedom away from me. Chapter 4. The Replacement, Vivian Lancaster. Word of my broken engagement spread quickly through the social circles, and it wasn't long before Jonathan found someone else to replace me. Vivian Lancaster, a stunning young woman from a wealthy family, was known for her grace and beauty. Jonathan had swiftly set his sights on her, seeing in Vivian all the financial benefits he'd hoped to gain from me. Within weeks, rumors of their whirlwind courtship swirled through the city. Though I was prepared, hearing the news still felt surreal. I'd expected Jonathan to react, but to court and propose to another woman so quickly? It confirmed everything I'd known. He'd never cared for me. I was simply a means to an end, and now Vivian was to be his next victim. At an evening gala, I spotted them together for the first time since the news of their engagement. Jonathan's arm rested possessively around Vivian, his charm as polished as ever. As their eyes scanned the room, his gaze settled on me. A flash of something, was it anger, or just annoyance, flickered in his eyes. He whispered something to Vivian, who looked my way with an unreadable expression before she gave a slight nod. Feigning composure, I met their approach with a calm, polite smile. "Elena," Jonathan greeted, his voice as smooth as ever, though his eyes held a challenging glint. "Allow me to introduce you to my fiancée, Miss Vivian Lancaster." Vivian extended her hand, her smile poised but distant. "A pleasure, Miss White," she said, her tone cool. "The pleasure is mine," I replied, maintaining my calm. "Congratulations on your engagement." Jonathan leaned in slightly, his smile taunting. "I never thought you'd let such a fine match slip through your fingers, Elena," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "But I suppose not everyone is suited for a life of high society." I met his gaze, unflinching. "And some are far too willing to sell their souls for it," I replied, my voice steady. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Jonathan." For a brief moment, a flicker of frustration crossed his face, but he quickly regained control, smirking as if he'd won some victory over me. "I always do, Elena." As they moved away, I watched him leave, realizing how utterly empty he was. He was nothing but a man who clung to wealth and power like a drowning man to driftwood, and now he had found someone new to manipulate. I no longer felt anger or hurt, only a newfound resolve. I had been given a second chance, and no matter how many replacements Jonathan found, he would never again control my fate. Chapter 5. A New Love with James. As I let go of Jonathan and the bitter memories he'd left behind, I started to rebuild my life, piece by piece. I had no plans to fall in love again, but life had other ideas. It was during a quiet afternoon at a bookshop when I ran into James Carter, an old friend from my childhood. James was as kind and warm-hearted as I remembered, his gentle smile the same as it had always been. "Elena, I almost didn't recognize you," he said, his eyes lighting up as he took my hand. "James," I replied, surprised to find myself smiling genuinely for the first time in a long while. "It's been too long." From that chance encounter, James and I began to spend more time together. Where Jonathan had been cold and calculating, James was the opposite, kind, understanding, and without an ounce of pretense. We'd meet to talk for hours, our conversations as natural as breathing, and I found myself sharing things with him that I hadn't dared tell anyone. The heaviness that Jonathan had left behind in my heart began to lift, replaced by something warm and steady. One evening, as we walked through the gardens, James paused, looking at me thoughtfully. "Elena, I heard about the engagement ending," he said carefully, as if afraid to overstep. "I wanted to tell you I'm sorry. I can't imagine how hard that must have been." I looked up at him, feeling a strange sense of peace as I spoke. "Thank you, James. But it was the best decision I've ever made. I thought I knew love, but what I felt for Jonathan wasn't love. It was a dangerous illusion." James's expression softened, his gaze holding mine with a sincerity that left me breathless. "You deserve more than illusions, Elena," he said, his voice low. "You deserve someone who sees you for who you truly are." His words stayed with me, comforting and true. I realized then how safe I felt with him, how different he was from the man who had only seen me as a prize to be won. With James, I felt seen, valued, cherished. Slowly, I found myself opening my heart to him, letting him in one day at a time. In him, I discovered a love that was gentle and genuine, something I never knew I could have. And for the first time, I dared to believe that I could finally find happiness and peace with someone who truly loved me, not for my wealth or status, but for the woman I truly was. Chapter 6. Jonathan's Panic. Not long after I found peace with James, I attended a gala hosted by the Lancaster family. It was an elegant affair, filled with high society's finest, and I arrived on James's arm, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in years. As we entered, I spotted Jonathan and Vivian across the room. Jonathan's gaze fell on me, and his confident smile vanished, replaced by a look I'd never seen before. Shock and perhaps panic? The orchestra played softly, and the room was alive with murmurs, but it felt as if everything had frozen in place. Jonathan's eyes darted between James and me, the disbelief clear in his expression as he watched me laugh and smile freely, my hand resting easily on James's arm. I couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. It wasn't long before Jonathan made his way toward us, his arm tightly linked with Vivian's. His voice was smooth, though his eyes held a flicker of tension. "Elena," he greeted, his tone forced. "It's surprising to see you here, and with Mr. Carter, of all people." "Jonathan," I replied calmly, meeting his gaze with a steady smile. "I'm surprised to see you as well. I thought you'd be busy attending to Vivian." Beside him, Vivian glanced curiously at Jonathan, as if she sensed something amiss in his demeanor. But Jonathan's attention remained fixed on James, his expression darkening with each passing second. James extended a hand, his expression polite but unyielding. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Mr. Hale," he said, his tone steady. Jonathan ignored the gesture, his jaw clenching slightly. "Elena," he said, barely containing his irritation, "I would have thought you'd choose your company more carefully. Are you truly lowering yourself to this?" I felt James's hand gently tighten over mine, offering support. I took a steady breath, refusing to let Jonathan's words rattle me. "James is a better man than you could ever hope to be," I replied, my voice calm and resolute. "And I am happier now than I ever was by your side." A flicker of anger crossed Jonathan's face, but he quickly masked it with a forced smile. "Happiness," he muttered. "We'll see how long that lasts." He turned, leading a confused Vivian away, his posture stiff. I watched him retreat, feeling nothing but satisfaction. Jonathan had once held me under his control, but now he was the one struggling to maintain composure. And as I looked at James, his warm smile steadying me, I knew that I was free. Free from Jonathan's hold, and free to live the life I deserved. Chapter 7. Jonathan's Scheme. Days after the gala, rumors began to spread. Whispers circulated through the halls of high society, tarnishing James's name and questioning his character. Rumors of gambling debts, dishonorable behavior, even claims that he was after my fortune. It didn't take long for me to realize the source, Jonathan. He was determined to ruin James, hoping I'd be forced to leave him. One afternoon, as we strolled through the gardens, James's brow furrowed, concern in his eyes. "Elena, I don't want you caught up in this," he said quietly. "I don't care what people say about me, but I don't want these rumors affecting you." I looked up at him, my heart aching at the worry in his gaze. "James," I said firmly, "I know Jonathan is behind this. He's desperate because he's lost control, but I won't let him manipulate me again." James shook his head, his voice filled with frustration. "He'll do anything to tear us apart, Elena. He's powerful, and he has connections that I don't." I took his hands, meeting his worried gaze with unwavering resolve. "Let him try," I replied, my voice steady. "He doesn't scare me anymore, James. Not when I have you by my side." A soft smile crossed his lips as he squeezed my hands. "You're stronger than he'll ever know," he murmured. "And I'll be here, no matter what he does." Later that week, I received a letter, an invitation from Jonathan, requesting a private meeting. It was his last desperate attempt to sway me, to force me to leave James. Against my better judgment, I agreed, knowing it was time to confront him face to face. In the dimly lit study of his estate, Jonathan waited, his eyes cold as I entered. "Elena," he began, his voice laced with faux concern, "I'm only thinking of your reputation. James Carter will ruin you. He's nothing but a commoner seeking wealth." I held my ground, unfazed by his words. "I see right through you, Jonathan. You think you can control me with lies and threats? You can spread all the rumors you want, but you'll never tear us apart." He leaned closer, his expression dark and twisted. "You're making a mistake, Elena. I will not be cast aside so easily." I met his glare with defiance. "The only mistake I ever made was trusting you. You can't control me anymore, Jonathan. This time, I'm free." As I left, I felt his gaze burning into my back, but it didn't matter. No rumor or scheme could shake my resolve. I had chosen my path, and I would not let Jonathan's threats deter me from the happiness I had found with James. Chapter 8. The Final Confrontation. The tension had been building for weeks. Jonathan's rumors continued to circulate, his schemes growing more desperate with each day. But I stood firm, refusing to let his lies tear me away from the life I had chosen. I knew it wouldn't be long before he confronted James directly. And he did. One evening, as the sky darkened and the evening lanterns cast shadows across the garden, Jonathan arrived unannounced. I saw him first, his figure rigid as he approached, and I moved quickly to join James, who was already waiting. Jonathan's gaze flicked between us, his jaw tight with barely contained rage. "Elena," he sneered, his voice low and venomous. "I hoped you'd come to your senses by now, but it seems this man has a stronger hold on you than I realized." I looked at him calmly, refusing to show any hint of fear. "Whatever you have to say, Jonathan, say it now and be done with it." His gaze hardened as he turned his attention to James. "Do you really think you're worthy of her?" he spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "You're nothing, a mere commoner, clinging to her for the fortune you'll never have." James's eyes darkened, but he remained calm, his voice steady. "Elena's with me because she wants to be, not because of wealth or status. That's something you could never understand, Jonathan." Jonathan let out a low, mocking laugh. "You think you've won, don't you? You think she'll stand by you when I ruin you?" I stepped forward, cutting him off. "Enough, Jonathan. Your threats don't scare me anymore. I see through you, through every manipulation and lie. You can't control me, And you certainly can't control James. Jonathan's face contorted with fury, his eyes narrowing as he took a step closer, his voice a harsh whisper. You have no idea the lengths I'll go to keep what's mine. You'll both regret this. James stepped protectively in front of me, his gaze unwavering as he met Jonathan's glare. You can threaten all you want, but you've already lost, Jonathan. Elena chose me, not out of obligation or fear, but because she loves me. Jonathan's mask finally cracked, his fists clenching as he realized he had lost all control. He looked between us one last time, his expression twisted with defeat and anger, before storming away without another word. As he disappeared into the night, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I turned to James, his warm, reassuring presence grounding me. It's over, I whispered, feeling the weight of years lift from my shoulders. James took my hand, his gaze filled with a quiet strength. Yes, Elena, you're free. And in that moment, I knew that I had won, not just against Jonathan, but against the shadows he had cast over my life. Chapter 9. A peaceful new beginning. With Jonathan gone, life became a breath of fresh air. The rumors he had spread faded, like shadows retreating from the morning sun, and I could finally live without looking over my shoulder. More than anything, I cherished the peaceful moments I shared with James, who had been my rock through it all. We were walking through my family's estate one golden afternoon, when James gently squeezed my hand, a soft smile playing on his lips. Elena, he began, a hint of nervousness in his voice that was rare for him. I've been wanting to ask you something. I turned to him, curiosity piqued. What is it, James? He stopped, facing me fully, his gaze filled with warmth. After everything we've been through, after all the storms, the fights, the heartache, I want nothing more than to build a future with you. A life free from all that came before, where it's just us. My heart swelled as he took a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple yet beautiful ring, one that spoke of love rather than wealth or status. Will you marry me, Elena? He asked softly, his voice steady, but his eyes filled with a tender hope. Without a moment's hesitation, I smiled, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes. Yes, James. 1,000 times. Yes. He slipped the ring onto my finger, and as he did, it felt as though the weight of the past had finally lifted. This was the love I had longed for, the kind of love that stood unshaken by ambition or greed, a love built on truth, respect, and trust. We spent the next few weeks preparing a quiet, intimate wedding, one that was nothing like the grand cold affair my marriage to Jonathan had been. My family and close friends gathered under the open sky as James and I exchanged vows, promising each other a life of loyalty and love. Standing there with him, with the gentle breeze rustling around us and the laughter of loved ones filling the air, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. I was free, truly free, for the first time in my life. As we shared our first dance, James leaned in, his voice a soft whisper in my ear. Are you happy, Elena? I looked up at him, my heart filled with joy. More than I ever dreamed possible, I replied. And as we danced under the starlit sky, I knew that this was the beginning of a beautiful new life, one where the shadows of the past were gone, and only love remained. Chapter 10. Jonathan's Regret. Time passed, and I embraced a life of joy and peace with James by my side. Yet one afternoon, as we strolled through the gardens of the estate, a familiar figure caught my eye. It was Jonathan, standing at the edge of the property, his once proud posture hunched, his face lined with something I'd never seen before. Regret. He must have heard about my wedding, about the happiness I'd found without him. As he looked toward us, I could sense the weight of his losses hanging over him, his gaze empty and hollow. This was not the Jonathan Hale I'd once known. Gone was the confidence, the cold arrogance that had once dominated him. Elena, he said, his voice soft, almost broken, as I walked a few steps closer, James's hand in mine. I met his gaze, and to my surprise, I felt no anger or bitterness, only pity. Jonathan, I replied, my voice calm. Why are you here? He hesitated, a flicker of pain crossing his face. I wanted to see you, he admitted, barely able to meet my eyes. to see what I lost. His eyes drifted to James, and there was something close to envy in his gaze. "You look happy," he muttered, as though the words were foreign to him. "It should have been me." James tightened his hand around mine, standing by my side with a quiet strength. "It never could have been you, Jonathan," I replied, my voice steady but gentle. "You cared only for power and wealth. Love was never part of your plans." Jonathan's shoulders sagged, his once imposing frame seeming small and defeated. I thought I could have it all," he murmured, his voice thick with regret. "But in the end, I have nothing." I looked at him, feeling the weight of finality. "You made your choices, Jonathan," I said quietly. "I hope one day you find peace within yourself." He nodded, looking away, and for the first time, I saw not a villain, but a man haunted by his own actions. "Goodbye, Elena," he whispered, turning and walking away, his figure slowly fading into the distance. As I turned back to James, he brushed a strand of hair from my face, his touch warm and reassuring. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. "Yes," I replied, a genuine smile lifting my lips. "I finally am." Hand in hand, we walked away from the past, leaving behind the shadows and embracing a future built on love and trust. For the first time, I felt completely free from Jonathan's hold, from the wounds he had left, and with each step, I knew I would never look back again.